Imagine the chill of marble underfoot, endless corridors echoing not with the stately tread of guards, but the chaotic symphony of children. Giggles, squabbles, the wail of a newborn. Over a dozen royal offspring trailing in your wake, and you, yourself, heavy with yet another life. This wasn't a nursery, it was a dynastic factory. For centuries, the crown wasn't just a symbol of power. It was a voracious maw, demanding heirs. And the queen was its primary engine. Her worth wasn't measured by treaties signed or enemies vanquished, but by the relentless tally of births. They endured the grinding cycle, blooming life, the agony of labor, the terrifying gamble of survival for mother and child alike. And beneath the jewels and silk, they faced a shared, brutal reality. Their bodies were vessels for the empire's future, and the cost was often crushing. Step into the glittering, ruthless world of the Mughal Empire, the early 17th century. Here, amidst the opulence of agate and gold, walked Arjumand Banu Begum, known to history as Mumtaz Mahal. Born in 1593, she was a Persian noblewoman, chosen not initially for love, but for alliance. Yet when she met Prince Khurram, later Shah Jahan, something shifted. At 19, she became his wife. The records speak of two other wives, political necessities, siring obligatory heirs. But Mumtaz, she became his anchor, his confidant, his soulmate. Their connection wasn't just court gossip, it was a force of nature that defied the cold calculus of royal marriage. He took her everywhere, from the hushed council chambers to the dust-choked battlefields where armies clashed. Their union spanned 19 years. 19 years. 14 pregnancies. Imagine that reality, a constant state of expectation, the body never truly recovering before the next life took root. 14 times she faced the precipice of childbirth. Only 7 of those precious lives clung on long enough to see adulthood. Jahanara, the brilliant daughter who would inherit her mother's political acumen. Aurangzeb, the future emperor, whose ambition would shake the very foundations of the empire. They were jewels in a crown purchased with pain. The 14 years weren't gentle. They were marked by the relentless cycle of hope, vulnerability, and loss. 7 times a cradle remained empty, a tiny life extinguished before it could barely flicker. The final chapter of her life unfolded in 1631, not in a gilded bedchamber, but a camp tent, following her emperor husband on campaign. She was pregnant for the 14th time. The labor for her daughter, Gohara Begum, dragged on for 30 agonizing hours. 30 hours of struggle, of pain beyond imagining, in a canvas tent miles from the comforts of the palace. The dynasty demanded its heir, and Mumtaz paid the ultimate price. She bled out, her strength finally broken, leaving behind a newborn daughter and an emperor shattered. Shah Jahan's grief wasn't just personal, it was seismic. He ordered the construction of a monument so breathtaking it would forever immortalize their love, a mausoleum that would dwarf empires. The Taj Mahal wasn't just stone and marble, it was the frozen echo of a broken heart, a testament to the woman who gave 14 lives to his dynasty and lost her own in the process. He was buried beside her nearly 3 decades later, their epic love story sealed in stone, the brutal cost, often forgotten. Fast forward to the opulent yet often restrained courts of 18th century England. Enter Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz, a German princess plucked from obscurity at 17 to become queen consort to King George III. Arranged marriages were the norm, often cold affairs of state.
Theirs, against all odds, blossomed into a genuine partnership. They shunned the endless balls and political machinations of court for a quieter life, preferring the relative peace of their estates, surrounded by children. So many children. In just over 2 decades, Charlotte accomplished what seemed impossible even for the most fertile queen. 15 children. 15 times she carried life. 15 times she faced the ordeal of birth. George IV, William IV, Prince Edward, figures who would shape the future of the monarchy sprung from her womb. But the sheer scale of it took its toll. Charlotte, though devoted, wasn't silent about the burden. While pregnant with her 14th child, she penned words that cut through the royal facade, a cry from a weary soul. I don't think a prisoner could wish more ardently for his liberty than I wish to be rid of my burden. It was a stark admission. The physical exhaustion, the loss of self, the relentless demand on her body. Yet her love for her immense brood was undeniable. She presided over their sprawling lives, a matriarch, shaping not just a family, but a dynasty that endures to this day. She outlived most of them, a common tragedy for prolific mothers of the era, and died at 74. Her legacy etched not just in the lineage she provided, but in the very image of the modern royal family she helped forge. The noise of her 15 children, once a daily soundtrack, became the quiet hum of history.
Travel back to the gritty, tumultuous 13th century, a time of crusades, castle walls, and the constant clang of steel. Forget gilded carriages. Imagine a queen living on horseback, the wind in her hair, the dust of the road clinging to her silks. This was Eleanor of Castile, married at 13 to her cousin, Edward, the future King Edward I of England. Theirs wasn't a union confined to polite courtly life. Eleanor was his constant companion, not just in England, but across oceans, into the heart of battlefields. She rode beside him on crusade, endured the hardships of campaign life, and, amidst it all, brought new life into the world, again and again. 16 times she was pregnant. 16 times she faced the dangers of childbirth, not in the sterile halls of a modern hospital, but in drafty castles, temporary camps, or alongside the very roads they traveled. Medieval life was brutal. Infant mortality was a constant, heartbreaking shadow. Eleanor knew this agony intimately. Of her 16 children, most were lost in infancy or early childhood. The records list tiny lives flickering out, names whispered in grief, leaving only a handful, including the future Edward II, to reach adulthood. Imagine the strength required, the sheer resilience to face that cyclical loss, to mourn a child 1 year and carry another the next, all while traversing continents and navigating political turmoil. Yet, her devotion to Edward never wavered. She followed him wherever duty called, often pregnant, sometimes actively grieving, always resolute. She was more than a queen. She was a partner, a survivor, a mother burying her dead while still carrying the hope of the next generation. Her final pregnancy, or perhaps the cumulative toll of 16, proved too much. In 1290, while journeying north with Edward, she succumbed to illness. The king's grief was profound, publicly displayed in a manner rarely seen. From Lincoln to Westminster, he ordered the erection of 12 magnificent stone crosses, marking each stop of her funeral procession. The Eleanor crosses still stand today, silent, imposing monuments to a love forged in hardship and a life defined by both immense personal loss and unwavering dynastic duty. They are not just markers of a queen's journey, they are a king's cry of sorrow, a physical manifestation of the price paid by the woman who literally carried the future of England through a life of constant motion and relentless grief. Following in the footsteps of her formidable mother, Empress Maria Theresa,
Maria Carolina of Austria was thrust into the dynastic marriage game at 15, bound to King Ferdinand IV of Naples and Sicily. She loathed the man, despised the alliance, but she was the third sister in line to marry him after the first two died prematurely. Duty, cold and unyielding, prevailed. She entered a loveless union, a political transaction disguised as marriage. Yet from this joyless partnership, Maria Carolina produced a staggering 17 children. 17 lives brought into the world, born of obligation rather than affection. Tragically, only 7 of her 17 children survived the perilous journey to adulthood. 7 lives to secure a lineage from a man she barely tolerated. But Maria Carolina was no meek consort. Personal loss and a feckless husband didn't break her. They seemed to steel her resolve. She transformed her role from a mere broodmare into a formidable political force. While Ferdinand hunted and reveled, Maria Carolina seized control of state affairs, her keen intellect and iron will shaping policy and strengthening alliances by the strategic marriages of her surviving children. She became one of the most powerful women in Southern Europe, a queen who compensated for a lack of personal happiness with an abundance of political ambition. Her reign coincided with the seismic shockwaves of the French Revolution, a period that claimed the life of her beloved sister, Marie Antoinette, on the guillotine. Napoleon's rise threatened her own kingdom. She fought fiercely, a queen defending her realm and her family against the revolutionary tide. Eventually, the political landscape shifted irrevocably. Forced into exile, she died in Austria at 62, her heart broken by the revolution that had consumed her family and her kingdom. Remembered not for a happy marriage, but for her relentless ambition and an unwavering will forged in the crucible of duty, loss, and political struggle. Few monarchs in history carried a heavier burden of personal sorrow than Queen Anne of Great Britain. Over 16 excruciating years, Anne endured 18 pregnancies. The statistics are brutal, almost unimaginable. Miscarriages, stillbirths, infants dying within days or weeks of birth. The losses were relentless, a constant, soul-crushing cycle of hope and despair. Her only child to survive infancy, Prince William, Duke of Gloucester, a frail boy around whom all dynastic hopes were pinned, died tragically at 11. Modern historians speculate Anne may have suffered from antiphospholipid syndrome, a blood-clotting disorder that would explain the devastating pattern of her failed pregnancies and the chronic ill health that plagued her later life, eventually confining her to a wheelchair. Imagine the quiet agony of that existence. 18 times she felt the hope of life within her. 18 times that hope was brutally extinguished. Yet, amidst this unimaginable personal tragedy, Queen Anne steered Britain through one of its most politically complex periods, presiding over the union of England and Scotland to form Great Britain in 1707. She was the first monarch of this united kingdom, a leader whose public duty stood in stark, almost cruel contrast to her profound private grief. When she died in 1914, at 49, frail and broken, the Stuart dynasty died with her. Her bloodline, the very foundation of dynastic survival, had been extinguished by a relentless series of personal tragedies, a queen who gave her everything, including her health and her heart, only to see the future literally die before her eyes. And finally, we arrive at a figure who pushed the limits of royal procreation to astonishing, almost unbelievable extremes. Queen Darajan of Georgia, also known as Daria, wife of King Heraclius II in the late 18th century. Between the ages of 12 and 42, Darajan gave birth to a documented 23 children. 23! It remains one of the highest confirmed counts for a queen consort in recorded history. This wasn't just biological output. In the turbulent Georgian court, it was a fierce political statement. Heraclius had sons from a previous marriage. Darigen, fueled by fierce maternal ambition and dynastic calculation, was determined that her sons, not her stepsons, would inherit the throne. She exerted immense influence over the aging king, persuading him to alter succession laws in favor of her own offspring. This blatant manipulation ignited simmering tensions within the royal family, a powder can waiting to explode. After Heraclius' death, chaos erupted. The crown passed to her stepson, George XII, who promptly ignored the king's manipulated will. Darigen's ambition curdled into open political warfare, pitting her own sons against their half-brother, plunging the kingdom into a bitter succession crisis. This internal turmoil provided the perfect opening for external powers. Russia, long eyeing the region, intervened, not as protectors, but as conquerors. The Kingdom of Georgia was annexed into the vast Russian Empire. Darigen, the queen who had borne 23 children and wielded immense political power, was stripped of everything. Her intricate schemes unraveled, her dynastic dreams crushed by realpolitik. She was exiled to distant St. Petersburg, living out her final years under close surveillance, a queen without a kingdom, a mother of 23 separated from her children, a woman whose ruthless political instinct ultimately led not to triumph, but to ruin. She died in 1807, far from the homeland she had fought so hard and so disastrously to control. These women were more than historical footnotes. They were the biological and often political engines of empires. They were the lifeblood, the bearers of futures, navigating immense pressure, personal tragedy, and the brutal demands of a world that saw their bodies as tools of statecraft. Behind the glittering crowns and velvet robes were mothers, wives, politicians, and survivors, their strength forged in the fires of duty, danger, and devotion. Their stories, etched in birth registers, nursery walls, and political maneuvering, remind us of the profound and often painful human cost behind the cold, hard march of dynastic history.